Let's make sure we talk about conflict because that's a fun one.
It is.
So if we're not addressing,
you and I may be the only ones who think.
But I think again we can give a different perspective to the listener to help them understand why it's a good thing.
I want to hear how you do conflict. I've been on this big conflict resolution thing lately.
So first, my management style, I think I'm relatively, I'm a collaborator at heart. I want to sell my vision, and the first thing I want is for people to push back. I don't need yes people. I need people that say, all right, I hear that. Are you worried about this, or could this potentially happen? I need the naysayers, and I need the devil's advocate for sure. I'm an incredibly opinionated person, and I need you to push back so I can convince myself and possibly change my mind. So I'm a collaborative person. There's a phrase that I use at work all the time. You'll never hurt my feelings as long as it's not personal at work. Right? Just don't get personal. If you disagree, I need you to stand your ground, but I need you to explain to me why you disagree.
Love it.
I don't believe that's a conflict. I believe that's healthy.
Yep.
That's a resolution or coming to terms with something. Or the advantage of being a CEO is there are times you get to make the decision. I heard all of this. With this information, I'm still convinced that we're going left, not right.
Yep.
Conflict is interesting because depending on who you're having conflict with and what that conflict is, I think there's lots of different definitions or different ways to handle it. If you're having a conflict with your upline, meaning your manager, and now you have to manage up, depending on their personality, you may have to be really careful.
Oh, yes.
Right? Oftentimes it's put your pride in your pocket and just walk away. You're not the boss. And although you may be right or think you're right, it's not an opportunity to butt heads. It might not be. With your subordinates, it's very similar as well. You don't want to be the hard ass, excuse my French, right? But you have a conflict with someone. The best way, in my mind, much like sales, is to try to get into the mindset of the other person.
Yes.
Explain to me the conflict, right? So early on in my career, we had two employees that were sitting next to each other. Their workstations were next to each other, and one person wore lots and lots of cologne or perfume. And it really bothered the other person. That's a conflict, an interesting one. Now, most people would say that's HR, and I don't want to make a huge deal of it, but we have to come to a conflict. We have to come to a resolution.
Right.
One employee's really disturbed, and the other one doesn't even know it.
Right.
So that's one of those conflicts where, hey, let's understand from both sides. Turns out we just explained that this person is really sensitive to smell. Any smell, even that's a tuna fish sandwich, the cologne that you're wearing, tissues that are scented. Can we ask as a favor either that, or can we possibly move the person? Right? Yeah. There's a resolution here. It's not necessarily that big of a conflict. Let's not make it a huge conflict. But I think if you start with, I wonder why you think what you think. I'm curious as to what you're thinking or how you're thinking. And maybe we don't have a conflict at all, or maybe we can just agree to disagree and move on from there. And I think that's a really tough lesson, especially I would argue in today's times with everything being so divisive. I can respect your opinion and still disagree with it. I can even think for you it's right, and for me it's not right. I can respect that, and I think in the world today, everything is a conflict, and I don't think it has to be.
If you've got an organization that can't resolve conflict, grab a mirror. Like, how well are you addressing conflict in healthy ways, in bridge building ways, not bridge burning ways that invite dissent and seek to find win-win, not the zero-sum game where there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. And that's why when you add in the family dynamic, where it is personal and we've got unresolved issues or conflicts. I mean, that stuff builds and then we're stuck seeing each other at every holiday and family takes sides. Man, when that happens, that if the senior leader is the biggest impact on the organization culture, that becomes the culture, right? You have a culture of kind of a dysfunctional family. Conflict is a great thing. Like, we are typically conflict avoidant, but conflict is a great thing because conflict tells me that you're invested. Every relationship is in one of three states. The first is intimacy. It's where we all want to be, right? And again, it's more than just physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual. It's where you can just sit together and be. It's where you in intimacy, you couldn't imagine being anyplace else, right? That's where we all aspire to be. The second place is conflict. That's the second state that every relationship, you're in one of these three states. The second one is conflict. It's exactly what it sounds like, but it doesn't always mean fighting. It might mean negotiation. It might mean we've got disagreements, right? It doesn't have to be all out fighting. It just means we got some things that we've got to work through, that we're constantly working at and working through. And then the third state is withdrawal, which is where we go when we've been in conflict too long and it has become unhealthy. So that understand that conflict itself is not a bad thing. Conflict it's how we deal with the conflict that either makes it healthy or unhealthy. When conflict is unhealthy for too long or unsafe, right? If there's physical abuse or verbal abuse, or if there's the condescension, there's the discounting of each other's opinions, or there's the instead of listening to understand, I'm listening to respond, and I'm just forcing my opinion because conflict is about winning. When it's unsafe for too long, we go to withdrawal, and withdrawal is where we disconnect emotionally because it just hurts too much to stay at the table and fight or stay in conflict. But the important thing to understand is in withdrawal, all the issues are still there. We've just disconnected them. We've given up. We've said it's just not worth it. It's not, like, why bother?
Which I think I would venture to say, and there are no stats that I know on this, but I would venture to say really the majority of companies and executive teams live in withdrawal.
Yes. Okay. The most important thing to understand about this model is that it's linear. So if you are in withdrawal and you want to get to intimacy, you can't jump over.
You have to go through conflict.
You got to go right back into conflict.
Yes.
You can't jump over it. But what you have to do is you have to do it differently. You have to use the tools. You have to create space. You have to give each other the benefit of the doubt.
You've talked about a lot of leadership philosophies that you share with people, right? And one of the things that I've seen you do very well is conflict resolution, right? You've been in conflicts. I've seen you been in conflicts. You and I have been in conflicts as well. But I've seen the approach you've taken towards conflict resolution. Can you share with your listeners and viewers what your approach is and how do you coach your clients through the AGN Group? What is your philosophies on conflict resolution?
I love that you're asking this question because multiple episodes of the Badass Leaders podcast, we've talked about conflict. So my philosophy is it was very much shown initially. I learned so much from the book Radical Candor. Mm-hmm. And another similar methodology is Making of a Manager. It's a little gentler. Yeah. Radical Candor is a little more brash. Yeah. It's a little bit too much for some people. But I think that when I think about conflict is a couple of things. One, I think part of the reason I love conflict is that when coming from an abusive childhood, I was never allowed to disagree. So I was never allowed to resolve any issues. And so I would over time see the impact of people who were just quietly going along. And I saw that it was like stagnant and it was hurtful and people weren't happy and you weren't really thriving. And so the example when I talked to Vicky about conflict is I said, the thing is that we are all better when we take all the pieces of ourselves and collaborate together to come to. Now, you're not always going to agree, which we both know, right? But if you keep all of those things in your head and they never come out, you have no idea the masterpiece you can create. And the example I used was of a puzzle. So imagine we're trying to do a puzzle together. And you have a couple of key pieces that you've tucked away, and I have a couple of key pieces. No matter how hard we work, like we might get a square rectangle thing we can frame, but it's not going to be a masterpiece. However, if we bring those pieces together and present them and then talk and collaborate over them and then integrate what makes sense to integrate, wow, it can be so beautiful. And so I think when I think of conflict, the first rule of conflict resolution is to remember that you should strive to get to understand the other person as a human being. So understanding humans as humans. The second thing is that whole adage, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, is to really allow the other person to share what their thoughts are. And then the third, I would say, is very a Brene Brown technique. It's to then say back to them, okay, so what I heard you say was this. Is that right? And then allowing them to say, no, that's not what I meant. I meant this. And there is something that's powerful in the mind when someone allows you to restate something and really cares and wants you to clarify. Then suddenly, instead of, I really want the word conflict to not feel like a cuss word to people. I think a lot of people like cringe over it, right?
Cringe is the right word, yes.
Yes. And I really want it to be something like when the conflict happens, this is our opportunity to make something much more beautiful. So let's sit in the moment and do it. And respecting the other person by doing that, I tell you, a couple rounds of making sure, yes, okay, Gia, is this what you meant? And then you finally get to yes. And I say, okay, well, when this happened, the story in my head was this, that, or the other. Of course, typically the other person's like, that's not what I meant at all, right? Yeah. Exactly. And then you start to realize that oftentimes the stories we tell ourselves in our head aren't reality. And once again, while having healthy conflict allows us to work through that and really have, some of the best relationships I have are ones that we've had healthy conflict with. And I say healthy in that it's a 2-way street. It's listening to understand on both ends. It's not raised voices or anger or things like that, but it's really striving towards a goal of wanting what's best. One of the things I love about conflict is that when you have teams that are willing to have healthy conflict, then that's where you can have so much growth. If everyone is sitting around shaking their head, yes, we all agree, then you really have a big problem with your culture from my perspective. And one of the ways I like to draw out that conflict is that when someone is willing to speak up and say, hey, I didn't love this or something, to say as a leader, thank you so much for bringing that. To acknowledge them in front of everyone and thank them for being willing to enter into this conflict resolution stage of whatever we're working on. So can you walk me through, I know in 25 years, I'm guessing perhaps there's been a little conflict in your organization. Can you walk us through what your methodology is?
Yeah, I'm not a huge. I'm uncomfortable in conflict, but I think a good leader has to become comfortable in uncomfortable situations, and so I've gotten better at that. I'm quick to either I've become more direct with it, of just saying, one, accepting it and saying, I'm sorry that I made you feel that way, or I'm sorry that was the interpretation. That certainly wasn't my intent. But let's talk through how, and so there was an example. I wasn't responding to emails from a certain leader. They were just updates. They were just saying, hey, just wanted to keep you in the loop on that. I read it, I'm done. And she let me know that, well, can you just let me know that you've read it so that I know that, just even if it's just a reply saying, got it, thanks. And I was like, oh, I assumed you thought that I had read it by, no responses, whatever. And so just understand, okay, now we understand that that's what you need to feel heard in that moment. So I'd reply, and, the first couple like, hey, here's my email letting you know that I heard you or whatever, but simple things like that. The other one I'll say is after the merger, another one of the leaders that I work closely with still to this day, we needed to get rid of somebody and we disagreed. And we got through it, right? Super hard. And it came from her side. And so we pulled it all off, and she was still kind of upset. And we had a little disagreement back and forth. And we got done, and I was like, hey, this was awesome. And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, I said, we needed to do this so that we can understand each other better. And I think this is good. I said the words, forget about the temperature of it, but the words we were saying needed to be said. You needed to understand my perspective. I needed to understand yours. And what we actually talked about is exactly how we need to solve problems. So let's do more of that, lower the temperature, but more of that, and that's a good thing. And we both agreed. And so I think that was like a bonding moment. And I actually shared that with the leadership team. I was like, hey, so-and-so and I, we made a lot of progress today. And here's why, and kind of talk through that. And just to try to show that vulnerability too.